Today is Thursday. We're in Washington. Friday we do something here. Last Friday I was in Cambridge doing something for Harvard Law School and another group. And it's all 60th anniversary because the more important people are not immediately available. They happen to be dead. So I said, you go call on me. What can I do? I'm still alive, more or less.
Well, and so, if the term indefatigable could be used, it would be Ben Ferencz. I mean, I think it's just remarkable.
Impossible would be equally appropriate.
I picked up a book authored by Michael Musmano,
Oh, yes.
The Eichmann Commandos, and he talks about the opening statement, and he talks about a guy named Ben Ferencz.
That sounds familiar, vaguely, but my memory for names is not so good, but that sounds familiar.
So here it goes. A brilliant young lawyer, a graduate of Harvard Law School, enjoying a perfect command of the German language, and armed with a rough and ready military experience gained as a member of an American combat outfit in Germany during the war, Benjamin Ferencz was excellently equipped to study and evaluate the Einsatzgruppen reports. It was Brigadier General Telford Taylor who had assigned this young man to the task of analyzing the captured documents, drafting the indictment, locating the accused men in the various prisoner of war compounds, selecting assistant trial lawyers, taking an active part in the trial work, and generally supervising the entire prosecution. That's Judge Musmano talking about you.
Well, I'm afraid he's right.
Let's talk
But I was already 27 years old.
Right. You're born in Transylvania
Yes, I was.
and found yourself at a very early age, like 10 months, in New York City.
Yes. My parents had the good sense to come along with me. And we decided to leave for Romania, which is where I was born, and seek our fortune in America. It was a very wise choice.
As far as college,
I went to City College in New York. I went to a special school for so-called gifted boys, a high school. I didn't know what gifted boys were because I never got any gifts. But going to City College, that would admit me automatically to City College. And from there I went to the Harvard Law School where I won a scholarship on my first exam on criminal law because I'd been raised in a high-density crime area. I knew all about crime from the earliest days. Unfortunately, I took a dim view of it and thought I'd like to do whatever I could to prevent it.
graduated 1943.
Yes.
Was there a lot of encouragement for you to either to get involved in the military at that time? As
I thought of that when I saw the gliders going across at the Normandy beach,
Yeah.
Later, and I thought, boy, I guess I was lucky not to be up there at that particular time. But I did get into the Army, and of course they immediately recognized my talent. I'd been one of the ways I earned a living was to do research for one of my professors, Sheldon Gluck, who wrote a book on war crimes, and I did all the research, which meant I read everything in the Harvard Law Library on war crimes, in French or in English. And so I knew quite a bit. And the Army recognized that talent immediately, so they made me a buck private in the artillery. That was typical Army, being trained for the invasion of France. Well, eventually, my Army career was not astonishing until they finally did, as we were entering Germany. At that time, I'd been through the Bulge and Normandy and the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line and Bastogne and all the other battles. And I was transferred to General Patton's headquarters, and there Colonel met me and he said, "We've been instructed to set up a war crimes branch. Your name has been forwarded from Washington. What's a war crime?" The Army had no experience whatsoever with war crimes. How should they have it? From where? And so I sat down and tried to explain what a war crime was, and became then a war crimes investigator. They sent me out on the first reports we had of war crimes. Shall I just continue with the
Please,
story?
this is phenomenal.
Well,
Exactly what it was.
what they the first reports we got were Allied flyers being shot down, American, British flyers over Germany, and they were almost invariably killed by the people on the ground. They would mob would come upon them. They had orders from Berlin, treat them as war criminals for bombing our cities, and so they beat them with sticks and stones and crowbars and stuff like that, and dump the bodies somewhere. And I'd come up and got a report through intelligence circles to the headquarters. I'd jump into a Jeep, ride out to the scene, grab the Burgermeister, or whoever was the highest official I could find, a police official, many of them had fled, and say, "I want you to arrest everybody who was within 100 yards of this event, which took place on this and this date." He'd bring them into some big room. I'd say, "All right, now line up against the wall. You're going to have to sit down and write and describe exactly what happened. Anybody who lies will be shot." That was standard procedure. I was aware of the Hague Conventions, and I know that that might not be the most appropriate approach, especially today, but there was a principle of reciprocity.
Sure.
The Germans certainly did the same thing, and they shot you on top of it. And then they would sit down and write out something or other, and after I read about 20 of them, I had a very good idea of what had happened, who had done what, and the next step is to find the bodies. So I'd inquire around. Sometimes they knew, sometimes they didn't. The bodies had been thrown into the river. I'd follow the river downstream, see where there might be some indication. If I came upon an old cemetery nearby, I'd go into the cemetery, look at the registry there, see if they had recorded anybody. If I saw something erased, which was sometimes the case, I'd grab a hold of whoever the custodian was and say, "What names did you erase from that date? That's so-and-so. And we're going to dig up all the bodies until you get me the ones that I'm looking for." Dig up the bodies, sometimes with my own hands, because you can't use a pick.
Sure.
Because you hit them in the head, you don't know if it's a bayonet or a bullet wound. Wash them down, try to identify them as being the same as the reported names of the soldiers. There are all kinds of stories of events like that kind. Call the quartermaster to come pick up the bodies, adjutant general to notify the next of kin, and then I'd prepare a report that this and this date, these Allied flyers came down, they were taken this and this town, they were beaten by the mob, they were finally killed by the policemen, the firemen, or taken to the SS headquarters. It varied. And then send out an arrest order to arrest the person responsible. So these were the earliest and the easiest cases. Later we ran into reports of...
Now, this would have been related to areas around the concentration camps?
No.
No?
This was anywhere in Germany.
Anywhere.
See? This was anywhere in Germany. And it happened, wherever Allied flyers were passing over. And soon we began to get reports of strange-looking people walking around. They came out of different camps, work camps of various kinds, and they looked like skeletons, and they were wearing things which looked like pajamas, and they all looked like they were dying. We didn't know the word concentration camp. That is something we learned later. And so I'd rush out to the area. First camp I ran was Ohrdruf, which was an outside camp outside of Buchenwald. Then I'd go into Buchenwald. And in each case, the procedure was the same. My job was to collect the evidence of the crimes, to try to ascertain who was responsible, if possible, which was very seldom the case, try to apprehend them because they fled into the woods. I would come into the area. The scenes of horror have been well described elsewhere. They are really indescribable. You cannot depict on television or on radio or even by recounting the real magnitude of horror. People dying all over the place, lying dead bodies, you don't know if they're dead or alive, lying in the dirt and the dust. The troops are rushing in and the SS are rushing out, and the inmates are grabbing some of the guards and beating them to death, burning them alive in the crematorium surrounded by stacked bodies looking like bags of bones, skeletons tied together, every conceivable illness, dysentery, diarrhea, lice, malaria, I don't know what was, not malaria, probably not, but every other disease was there. So my job, I'd go right into the Schreibstube, the office where they kept the records, and the Germans kept very good records, thank you very much. And there would have the Totenbücher, the books describing how many people had been killed, and giving names and numbers and the cause of death. And page after page of fictitious causes, such as auf der Flucht geschossen, shot while trying to escape. And you'd find the same thing, and then you'd find typhus, pages of typhus. Also collect, and there are all kinds of stories how that was done, the names of the officers in charge and who was at the camp. Collect all of that, get some affidavits from those inmates who were still capable of preparing affidavits, there were some, and then back to headquarters, or if necessary move on to the next camp, because we were moving very fast. The Germans were in full retreat, and by that time I'd get a report, another one's in, so I'd go on to the next camp, Ebensee, Mauthausen, half a dozen different camps, and then get back to headquarters, wherever it was, in Munich or wherever, sit down, type up the report, add the evidence to it, the documentation, whatever I had. The case is ready for trial. And these cases went to trial, and these have been completely forgotten.
These are the military commissions?
These were military commissions, which was set up, and I hammered the first sign up, and I've got a picture of that in the Holocaust Museum, which has my archives, saying U.S. Army, 3rd U.S. Army War Crimes Section. And these military commissions, I don't think we called them military commissions. It was too fancy a name. Maybe I did. I don't remember anymore. But in any case, this we know today as military commissions, about which the Army has apparently completely forgotten. They're still questioning whether these are legal or so-and-so. And, well, these military commissions, when they used as a basic document these reports, which I'd picked up, and I had a buddy who came along. He was a second man, a man by the name of Jack Nowitz, who was a Yale law graduate, spoke several languages. He was a buck private in the engineers. By that time I had reached the rank of corporal, and when my lieutenant colonel was promoted to a full colonel, and he said, "I appreciate the work, this is the result of your work," he made me a sergeant of infantry. And anyway, so these became the basis for then the so-called Dachau trials. And those trials, I mention it because you're going to contrast it, I suppose, with the IMT and the subsequent Nuremberg trials, and it's an interesting contrast. I think the average time of the trial per defendant was about 2 minutes, and the way that ran was that 30 or 40 of them would be brought in from, let's say, Buchenwald or Mauthausen or Ebensee or one of the other camps. We had the names. They had been picked up in the POW camps. Line them up rows with a number on them, 1, 2, 3, so and so. The presiding officer, usually a captain or a major, would come in. Defense counsel were assigned, lieutenants usually, no legal experience whatsoever. And number 1, stand up. Your name Hans Schmidt? Yes. Jawohl. were you a guard in the concentration camp? Jawohl, but I didn't do anything. Yeah, jawohl. You're accused of being an accomplice, an accessory to the murder and abuse of the inmates of that camp. What do you have to say about that? Not guilty. I was just carrying out my orders. You got anything else to say? No. Sit down. Next. So-and-so.
Yeah.
Stand up. You are so-and-so? Yes. You have anything more to say than that? Well, I was just a cook. Anything more to say? That's all. Sit down. Next. So on. And they'd go down, and, in a couple of hours, they were finished. Judges would adjourn, so-called judges, to their next room, come back 5 minutes later. All the defendants are guilty, and each one is sentenced to death. And many of them were executed. There were about 1,000 people who were tried that way, a little more than 1,000. And several hundred were executed. I don't think I'm sure they weren't all executed. They were then shipped off to Landsberg prison, which was known as War Crimes Prison Number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, I had it. I had joined
Should have been in middle of 45.
This was, yes, I was in the camps. I remember on May Day, 1945. The war ended on May 7th, depending where you were. I remember celebrating May Day celebration. I think it was in Mauthausen. I was moving so fast. I didn't know the name of the camp, where it was. I knew the name of the town, but well. The war was over. We had won the war. I had joined the army to do my bit. I went home. I stowed away on a ship, on a troop transport, and went home. The army, of course, took it in view of my sudden disappearance. However, they nevertheless gave me an honorable discharge and 5 battle stars and a letter from the President of the United States, facsimile, a grateful nation, thanks you for your services. And I never intended to go back to Germany again, or to have anything whatsoever to do with war crimes trials or war criminals.
Sure.
That was my absolute intention. I was going to go and practice law. I had finished law, I'd gotten past the bar exam while I was in the Army, and that was my intent when I got a telegram from Washington saying, "Dear sir," they had never called me sir in 3 years in the Army, "would you please come to the Pentagon? We'd like to talk to you at our expense." Okay, so I went to the Pentagon. There I was met by Colonel Mickey Marcus, who was a recruiter for the subsequent trials at that time, and also for Jackson.
By the way, just curiosity, this would have been, you kind of mustered out, if you will, right after Christmas.
I was mustered out the day after Christmas.
Were you following the trials at all?
I was aware of the trials that they were going on in Germany. They had all of the spotlight. Nobody knew about the Dachau trials, but I really wasn't following them in detail because my goal was to get the hell out of there as fast as possible.
Sure.
I had it, and anyway, Colonel Marcus, as he was then a colonel, said, "Look, we need you. We want to send you back. We'll make you a full colonel to do essentially what I was doing as a sergeant of infantry." And I said, "In the Army?" He said, "Yes." I said, "To get me in the Army, you have to declare war on Germany again and be losing." I said, "I'm not going back into the Army again. Finished." Oh, he said, he was a tough New York boy, and he said, "Benny," he said, "we need you now. And you can go as a civilian with the same rank." And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, you'll have a simulated rank." And I said, "Can I tell lieutenant colonels what to do?" And he said, "Sure." I said, "Wait, I'll let you know." So I called up my sweetie, who was a Hungarian girl from Transylvania also, and I said, she'd been waiting patiently for 10 years or so while I went off to law school, went off to the Army. I said, "How would you like to go to Europe for a honeymoon?" She said, "Oh, this is so sudden." I'd love it. And so we were wed, and I said, "I'm going off now to Nuremberg." And what Mickey Marcus had in mind for me was to go back to the Dachau trials. But Telford Taylor, who was also recruiting for the subsequent trials, heard about it somehow, and he hijacked me. He called me in and he said, "Look, I'd like you to consider going back with me for these subsequent trials." He said, "I've checked your record and I find that you were very qualified, but that you're occasionally insubordinate." I said, I'm sorry, sir, that's not correct. I'm usually insubordinate. I do not obey orders which I know are stupid, and I don't obey illegal orders either. I said, but I've been checking up on you. I don't think you'll give me any illegal orders. He said, you come with me. So I went back then for the subsequent trial with Telford Taylor. His first assignment was to send me to Berlin. He said, you know about war crimes investigations, documentation. We have planned tentatively 12 trials, and we need the evidence to tie it to the defendants. Because if you have the evidence and no defendant, you've got nothing. You've got defendant, no evidence, you've got nothing. So you go and organize and find the evidence to convict industrialists, doctors, medical, guys, Justice Ministry, Foreign Ministry. So I set up an office in Berlin with about 50 researchers, combed all of Berlin for documentation, set up an office in the former Foreign Ministry, whatever. We had the Berlin Document Center, very interesting establishment. Outside it looked like a little villa, a typical farmhouse villa, underneath subterranean channel, blocks long, loaded with 9 or 12 million Nazi Party files. Anybody who had ever been in the SS or had applied for membership in the party, the files were there underground and we captured it. And so I put staff in there, we started going through, and one day one of the researchers came up and he said, look what I found. He had 3 loose leaf type folders, and these were reports from the front of the it was Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, which is what it was, been translated, meant reports from the Soviet Union of these special units called Einsatzgruppen, which nobody has ever been able to translate, and they were called murder squads. Their assignment was to go in behind the lines and eliminate any opposition or possible opposition to the German army or to their interests. They translated that correctly, as that was so intended, that you murder in cold blood every Jewish man, woman, and child, as well as every gypsy you can get your hands on, and anybody else that you think may be a possible threat to the Reich. And that's what they did. And every day they reported, almost every day, back to headquarters in Berlin, where they were assembled, nice and neat, so that I could pick it up and with a little adding machine add over 1 million people murdered in cold blood. And I said, that's enough. I took samples of it. I flew down to Nuremberg. General Taylor, I said, General, we've got to put on another trial. He said, we can't. We have a budget. It's all been approved in Washington. We have set trials. We don't have staff. I said, but look, it's cold-blooded mass murder. The documents are here. He said, could you do it in addition to your other responsibilities? I said, sure. He said, you got it. So I became the chief prosecutor for the United States in what was surely the biggest murder trial in history. I arrested my case after 2 days. I didn't call a single witness because witnesses are fallible. I didn't need them. I said, I've got their records. They can't deny it. I'll cross-examine one against the other, which is what I did. I convicted all of them. 13 of them had death sentences, and they were all convicted of something. And 6 of them were SS generals. I didn't have any enlisted men in my defendants. They were all selected on the basis of their education and their rank. Most of them had doctorate degrees. Some of them had double doctorate degrees. And I was then 27 years old, and it was my first case. That made a pretty good record, which I don't think they're likely to beat at any time soon.
One of the principal defendants was sort of a matinee idol-looking guy, Otto Ohlendorf.
Oh, yes. I will tell you about Otto Ohlendorf.
Yeah.
Otto Ohlendorf was the lead defendant. Is that all right? You want me to just continue this kind of a narrative?
This is incredible.
All right. Otto Ohlendorf was the lead defendant. According to his reports, his unit, Einsatzgruppe D, had murdered in cold blood over 90,000 people, mostly Jews. Of course, they never called it murder. They said they were liquidated, the town was cleansed, they were transported, they went on a heavenly journey, Himmelfahrt. They had such nice expressions for cold-blooded murder. When asked to explain, to admit that he'd killed 90,000 people, he said, well, I can't tell you that for sure, because sometimes the troops bragged about the body count. They exaggerated. It might have been less. Could it have been 70 or 80,000? Yeah, it could have been. And now the most interesting thing of the whole trial, for today particularly, was, why did you kill the Jews? Why did you kill all those people? And the answer came back very loud and clear in a rather contemptuous tone. Well, we knew that the Soviets were planning to attack us, and therefore it was necessary for us to anticipate that attack and have a preemptive attack against them. And why did you kill all the Jews? Well, we knew that the Jews were sympathetic to the Bolsheviks, and therefore we had to kill the Jews. And why did you kill the gypsies? Well, the gypsies were unreliable. Couldn't come into an area and have gypsies running around, so we had to kill all the gypsies. And why did you kill the children? Thousands of little children taken out in gas vans and gassed on the way, or half gassed on the way, and dumped into a ditch. Why did you kill hundreds of thousands of children? Well, if they grew up and they knew that we'd murdered their parents, they would be enemies of Germany. So we were interested in the long-range security of Germany, and therefore it was necessary to kill them too. As if to say, are you stupid? Of course that follows. No remorse whatsoever. After he was sentenced to death, I went down to the death house for the first time to talk to him man to man. I thought he might say, tell my 5 children I love them, or we knew he was going to hang for sure, or tell my wife something. Instead he said, the Jews in America will suffer. You'll see that I was right. And I said, goodbye, Mr. Ollendorf, and walked out. The next thing I saw was a picture of him being hanged and him lying in a box. What was particularly instructive in that was the argumentation as justification for the murder, cold-blooded murder, of all those people and the attacks against all the countries that were invaded. And the court, Ms. Mono in charge, and the judgment said, no, that is no justification for killing. Anticipatory self-defense is no excuse, because if all nations did that, what would the world look like? And today, when I hear similar arguments coming out of high officers in the United States, it sort of sends chilling reminders through me.
Yeah. Mono, in his book, talks about Ollendorf in the closing statement. And he said, Ollendorf spoke first, holding the courtroom spellbound with a speech that would have done justice to a chair of philosophy at the University of Berlin. Erudite and profound, the discourse could have been addressed to students in history and political science and bore little resemblance to a plea for mercy, and certainly none for exoneration. While not exactly defending National Socialism, Ollendorf said that those who were attracted to it were longing for spiritual support for a goal behind the social order into which they were born, a goal which promised them true human dignity, firm human objectives, and a spiritual and religious center for their development into human beings. He failed to tell us, however, how National Socialism was to achieve that goal, for if there was one thing which National Socialism did not do, it was to promote respect for human dignity and a spiritual and religious development of human beings. And it was Musmano's reaction to Ollendorf's.
Well, Musmano's reaction was a little bit stronger than that. He sentenced him to death by hanging.
That's right.
For the crimes of which you have been convicted, this tribunal sentenced you to death by hanging, in a very dramatic procedure in the courtroom, where he went down the list and sentenced 13 of them to death by hanging. That was and this is an American judge from an appellate court in a very fine judgment, a carefully reasoned judgment, holding that the preemptive anticipatory strike is no justification for the crime, and those who commit them are sentenced as war criminals for the crime of aggression and other crimes against humanity.
As handsome as Otto Ollendorf was, probably the extreme was Paul Blobel?
Yes, Paul Blobel. He did the Baba Yar job. 33,771 Jews massacred one at a time in cold blood on 29-30 September 1941. Nice fella, otherwise.
Gosh. You're Jewish.
Yes, I am.
And you are prosecuting those who persecuted your race. That must have been hard.
Well,
I mean, emotionally hard.
it was very hard in a way. I didn't perceive that as a crime directed only against me, because although I was raised in the Jewish tradition and came from an Orthodox home originally, I'm personally much more tolerant of all religious views. And the only place that showed up in this, I don't think I've ever recorded. I didn't want to handle the Ollendorf cross-examination. I didn't want it to appear that this young Jewish boy is taking this handsome German general, father of 5 children, who killed 90,000 Jews, and I'm persecuting him or picking on him for that. So I asked Jim Heath, to handle the cross-examination. Now, Jim Heath, he's dead now, and so is Taylor, so I can tell the tale. Taylor said fire him. He was an alcoholic. And he couldn't concentrate on his work. And he and I had been roommates somewhere when we first came to Nuremberg, and I liked him. And I said, Jim, you're going to have to pull yourself together. I'm going to give you the chance to cross-examine the lead defendant in what is certainly the biggest murder trial in history. If you blow it, you're out. I can't save you. And I said to Taylor, I said, look, let me handle him. We're going to give Jim Heath a chance. He can do it. He's got the ability. He just can't pull himself together. And he came from Virginia, or Carolina, I'm not sure anymore. I think it was Virginia. And he was a Southern gentleman, handsome, spoke with a Southern drawl, and very polite, the Virginians are, the Southerners are. And he went to Ollendorf, and he just took him through the paces quietly. Mr. Ollendorf, would you tell us why, you did so-and-so? Miss Mana would be jumping in from time to time with a little more eagerness. He was the Italian temperament in him. But Jim Heath did a first-class job. Even Taylor agreed it was a first-class job. And the reason I did that was simply because I thought it would be a more persuasive presentation if it didn't appear to be a Jew out of vengeance trying to hold accountable this important Nazi figure. Now, I wasn't interested in glory for myself.
Right.
I was interested in bringing out the truth in the best possible way. And that may be a long answer to your question, but another incident which relates to your question. I went into the camps. I wasn't looking for Jews particularly. These were inmates. They were people, who were being starved and killed, and it made no difference to me, what their background was. And on May Day, 1945, it's the week before the war ended officially, there was a celebration in one of the camps. I don't remember if it was Abe and Say or one of the big camps, and they put up a big tribune in the middle of the campgrounds with pictures of Stalin and pictures of Truman by that time, and Churchill, and the inmates were going to celebrate May Day. And they were marching in different columns, carrying the French flags and the Czech flags and the Yugoslavian flags, and another group with no flags. I said, who are they? He said, well, they're the Jews. I said, well, why aren't they marching with the others? No, the Jews march separately. So within the camps, among the inmates, there was the same discrimination against the Jews. Is that an interesting thing?
I've never read that.
No. A lot of things I've seen that nobody's ever heard.
Oh. Were you surprised with the verdicts when they came down? They were all convicted, but certain received death by hanging.
Right. There too, I had a very interesting reaction. First of all, I didn't ask for the death penalty. Not that I think they didn't deserve it. If someone had said that they'd murdered 1 million people, we should chop them all up into 1 million pieces and feed them to the dogs, I would have thought that would not have been inappropriate under those circumstances. But I felt it was not for me to tell Miss Bono or the other judges what to do. Very often prosecutors did that. There was a French newspaper headline, "Je vous demande leur tête," I demand their heads. I never said that. On the contrary, I said nothing. I said I wanted them to give us a judgment which would use the rule of law to ensure that no people were killed because of their race or their ideology or their religion, because that's the reason these people were killed. They didn't share the race or the ideology or religion of their executioners. And I thought that was a horrible thing, and I still do. And I pleaded with the court to use the rule of law to make that impossible in future. I said, if these men be immune, then law has lost its meaning, and man must live in fear. And I have followed that philosophy ever since. Now, when the sentences were handed down, I had a scorecard as to what I thought might be the sentences for each one. Musmano was more severe than I would have guessed. It was customary at Nuremberg that the chief prosecutor of a case, at the end of the trial, to celebrate the end of the trial, whether it was good or bad verdict, would have a party for the whole staff. And I invited the whole staff to come to my home for a party that evening. I couldn't go to my own party. I had such a splitting headache from the tension in the room. I was totally depressed. Instead of celebrating, great victory, I thought it was a great victory. Guy in his first case, convicts everybody. Man, I didn't think it was a great victory at all. I didn't think about that at all. I felt rotten. And I just went to bed instead of going to my own party. So it had a rather strange effect. I would not have anticipated that myself. But that's the way it was. And I don't think anybody else has gotten this on tape either.
Yeah. And specifically why it was rotten, or why you felt rotten?
I don't know. I can't answer that, really. First, it was more severe than what I would have done. And to listen one after another for the crimes of which you have been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. And the guy takes off the earphones, steps back, the door closes in front of him, he drops down into hell. The next one comes, puts on the earphones. Global, for the crimes of which you've been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. Off come the earphones, and down he goes, down into hell. You could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom, That's my recollection of it now. That's 60 years ago. But I'm sure this recollection is very precise.
It's more than precise. This is Musmano. I was just reading this. Talk about the elevator. And exactly.
Yeah, the lift, yeah.
The lift. And he said, then again was heard the soft hum of the elevator machinery, and once more the door of fate was moving. This time he talked about Heinz Yost, slight built it up that I stepped forward into the bright lights of the fluorescent chandeliers, picked up, adjusted the earphones, looked forward to the bench expectantly. Only a few seconds was needed for the sentence. We talk about you're found guilty, the tribunal sentenced you to life imprisonment. Defendant bowed low, came to an erect position, again expression lighted as if he had heard the court say, you are hereby notified you're going to a luxury tour around the world, perhaps the penalty, Then he talks about going into the elevator, hearing the machinery go down, and up comes Global. And then hearing again, the elevator ascended and descended like the perpendicular swinging of the pendulum of fate. All of the defendants, with the exception of two, took their medicine without a whimper. So that elevator...
It was a lift. It went around in a circle. It didn't go up and down. It went in a circle, constantly around. On the top, the thing turned over and went down, and it was sort of like a dumbwaiter. We called it the Black Mariah. And that's where it went. You could hear it clank, 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 clank. It would go to the top and come down on the other side, stop at the door. The door sliding panel would open, and the defendant would step forward, look at the tribunal, put on the earphones, stand at attention, and times which you've been convicted, the tribunal will send you to death by hanging. Takes it off. No expression, nothing. None of the defendants had any remorse whatsoever. Quite remarkable. That was the biggest disappointment for me in Germany. I never found somebody who said he was sorry. Sometimes they said some kind words, but those were people who were kind people, had nothing to be sorry about. Among the criminals, nothing. The closest you could come was when one of them, Klingelhofer, slit his wrists and said something about, I see now this terrible blasphemy which has been committed, and so on. A recognition, but regret, I'm sorry to say, there was none. And that awareness stays with me today. There are people who believe that their perception of a righteous world order is so powerful, so overwhelming, that they're ready to die and kill for that, and without regret. And we see it today, and I mean literally today and yesterday and tomorrow. So we've got a long way to go, and I've been working on it for 50 years, trying to change the way people think. And that's what brings me here today as well.
At the Einsatzgruppen trial, to what extent was the shadow of the IMT and Jackson's work there part of what your work was?
It was there all the time. In fact, I was very much moved by Jackson's opening statement. If you read my opening statement as well, you can see there is a Jacksonian influence. I try to pitch it on a high level. This is a case of plea of humanity to law, and none of this, let's go get these murderers. So Jackson had an enormous influence on me personally, by virtue of his judgment and his approach, and Telford Taylor had the same. Telford Taylor, I got to know him very well. We were law partners of sorts in the later years, and they were both outstanding men of highest moral quality and integrity, and excellent lawyers, and both of them good writers. Jackson said that, Taylor said that Jackson wrote on the wings of angels or something like that, and it couldn't be matched, and he was right. In his best, Jackson couldn't be beat. That to pass these defendants a poisoned chalice is to put it to our own lips as well. That 4 great nations, stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and subject their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is the greatest tribute that power has ever paid to reason. These are memorable statements, and they certainly had an influence on me and on what I did, not only the trials, but in the later years as well.
In fact, one of your statements during, I think it was your opening statement, was recited in the United Nations.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's very interesting. Nice of you to remember that. When the first president of the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia and for Rwanda had to render his report to the Security Council and the General Assembly, there were two places of the activities in this court, he ended his 50-page report, and I found it by chance. I had picked up the report at the UN. I had no idea it was in it. I'm reading it, I come to the last lines, and he says, as Benjamin Ferencz said in the Einsatzgruppen case, if these men be immune, then law has lost its meaning, and man must live in fear. So that also became an inspiration for those who were working on this about 50 years almost to the day of the time I uttered it in the Nuremberg courtroom.
It was remarkable. How did the group of the Nuremberg prosecutors gather together as a group, an NGO, and ultimately you and Whitney Harris and Henry were part of that Rome Treaty negotiation? How did that all happen?
Well, the way that happened was, there are 2 strands. There are 2 different questions there. First, how did the Nurembergers get together? I had continued my efforts to create an international criminal court, which had been the anticipation after Nuremberg and the decision of the United Nations, and of course it went awry because of the Cold War, nothing happened. But I got involved as an NGO for various organizations and tried to promote that. I went to all the meetings, and I wrote articles, and I wrote books, and stuff like that. And at one of the meetings we had, one of the lawyers there from Human Rights Watch, as a matter of fact, said, "Hey, Ben, why don't you bring the Nuremberg lawyers together, and so you have another NGO, the Nuremberg prosecutors, taking a stand." I said, "It's a good idea. We're having a reunion in Washington," I think it was, with the Nurembergers, and I'll raise the question there, and we'll pass a resolution in support of the International Criminal Court. And I drafted the resolution, came to the reunion in Washington, and he said, talked to a few of the lawyers there, Telford, and by that time Telford was a little bit already showing the signs of age. He was about about 90, and close to it. And so we got together and had lunch, and there was Whitney, and there was Henry King, and there was about 3 or 4 others. And I said, look, how about we set up an organization, and we become a sort of a lobby for the ICC, for International Criminal Court. That's a good idea. Okay, so we had to elect somebody president. There was Sprecher was there too, and Bell Mayer, and so we checked Whitney because he had been with Jackson, and the rest of us were mostly subsequent proceeding guys. We may have had 1 or 2 others, and we finally put together a group of about 12 or 13 still living prosecutors, and we called it Nuremberg prosecutors or something or other, and Whitney was the coordinator or the chair of that group. When the Rome Statute was coming up, I had set up a peace center, so-called, at Pace Law School, where I had been working as an adjunct professor when 2 of my kids were students there. And I did it more as a lark. I was, I don't know, 60, 70 years old, and I wanted to teach the law of peace, and that's what I was teaching. So I had managed to get that Pace Peace Center accredited for purposes of participating in the Rome Statute. But I wanted to get the Nurembergers. You could send, I think, 2 or 3 people, and that's it. I said, we got the Nuremberg group too, and I gave them the names of Whitney and Henry, and said they should also be accredited to come to Rome and do that, and join in that. Well, so that worked out that way. I was, I suppose, honored, I think it was the only one of the kind, to address the delegates. You'll find that statement on my website. My address to the Rome Station begins that I've come to Rome to speak for those who cannot speak. It was a very successful and moving address. And Whitney came there, and he was there for quite a while. Unfortunately, his wife, who was with him at the time, got ill and had to rush away. Henry, if he stuck his head in, it was about it. He was an attendee at the conference. And so that's how that came about. But we stayed together through using Whitney as the central focus. Unfortunately, Whitney is now about 92. He's going to be here tomorrow, I hope.
Yep.
I expect. We were together in Nuremberg, and we did a thing there not a few weeks ago. And he was not computer savvy. And so, we didn't have too much correspondence going in and out on the old system. But nevertheless, it was there, and gradually the people have died off. And now there are only the 3 of us left.
Good for you for keeping that flame alive.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get a sense, Ben, at this stage of the game, that the United States will join, and if so, when?
This administration will certainly not join.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely clear. Eventually, I expect they will, and I base that expectation on several considerations. First of all, the present attitude is so stupid that it's almost incredible.
Mm-hmm.
It has been described by some learned people as bordering on insanity. And I think it's a very polite way of putting it. For example, we are going around and threatening, and we have succeeded in threatening, intimidating about 100 countries. They must undertake an obligation to give immunity to any American or any American's employee against any possibility of being sent to The Hague for trial. Now, I'll tell you why this is absolutely stupid. First of all, everybody who is confronted with that is insulted. Many of them say, look, you're threatening to take away your military assistance, you're threatening to take away financial assistance, which we use to combat terrorism or drug trafficking. If you take it away, we haven't got the planes, we haven't got the help, we can't help you in that. We don't care. Either you sign or you're out. The number of countries that have been antagonized, over 100. The number of people helped, how many Americans have been protected by that, is 0. Not one will ever be protected by that stupid immunity agreement, which John Bolton, as the leading actor on behalf of Jesse Helms, has been ramming down the throat of 100 nations who view us as an arrogant, stupid bully. and not without cause. So because it's stupid, they can't be stupid forever. You can't fool all the people all the time, and they can't be that stupid forever. When they see that this court poses no real threat except to criminals, the innocent need never fear the rule of law. When they see that it poses no threat, certainly not to service people. This court is only designed to deal with the leaders of those who plan and participate in perpetrating few crimes. The first crime is genocide. The next one is crimes against humanity. The next one is major war crimes. Aggression, which is my favorite, the supreme international crime, has been put in a side pocket because of the United States pressures. And whether it'll ever be able to come out of that pocket, I don't know. I'm working like mad to do that. I'm lecturing here tomorrow in Washington, and I will certainly make that point to try to keep that alive, as I tried very hard in Rome, and it just by the skin of its teeth stayed in. So every nation has the prior right to try their own criminals. It's written in the statute. The prosecutor, who is supposed to be there to pose a threat to American service members, Luis Moreno Campo, I made the speech inaugurating him into his office, a distinguished human rights lawyer activist from Harvard University. We were together in Harvard last week. The idea of him going out and persecuting American service members is absurd. He's under the supervision of the Assembly of State Parties, all those who have ratified it, including France, England, Canada, Australia, the European Community, all of American friends. They would fire him like a shot if he ever did such a thing, and of course he never would. And so these arguments which have been raised in opposition are in a polite article that I wrote. All of this is on my website, www.benferenz.org, saying it was misguided fears of the United States. That's one of my polite mood. If you ask me for my unpolite mood, I think it's idiotic. Idiotic. And America will not want to be left behind. This court will go forward. Now, of course, without the United States, and with the United States trying to kill it, which is what they're trying to do. They tried to abort the baby before it was born. Now they're trying to kill it in the cradle. But they will not succeed, because it makes sense to, instead of having all of these little tribunals popping up, if you had a court, imagine what the world would look like today if 20 years ago we had an international criminal court. Sure. You wouldn't have the problem with Saddam Hussein today. You wouldn't have the problem with Milosevic. You wouldn't have all the problems today, which, are you going to have a trial in Sierra Leone? Are you going to have one in Cambodia? And so on. So it's part of the evolutionary process that the Nuremberg principles laid down, beginning with Jackson, Taylor, and all the others who followed, is vital for a peaceful and humane world. And we are moving in that direction, but it takes a long time to change the way people think. And we are so busy glorifying war and killing that to turn that around will take several generations at least. I am now past 85, and I will not live to see it. But nevertheless, I am confident that I see how many things have changed. We have given up slavery, which divided this country. We have given women rights, which we never had before. We have abandoned colonialism. These required major changes in the way people think, and I could give you half a dozen more. So you can change the way people think, providing you stay with it. You need patience, you need perseverance, you have to have education, people have to learn tolerance instead of hatred. They must be willing to compromise with even their strongest held ideals in order to maintain peace in the world. All of these things can be done and are happening, but one human life is not long enough to see reaching the ultimate goal. But because I'm confident and because I lecture all around, mostly I try to lecture to young students, they are full of enthusiasm, full of hope. With the new communications revolution, we cannot predict how long it will take, because the world is going to change in ways we cannot imagine. And I think that because of Nuremberg and because of those principles that all human beings should be allowed to live in peace and dignity, regardless of their race or creed, and that we can do it, that eventually we'll get there.
God bless you for doing this. This is terrific.
On that happy note.
You know, you really are a standard bearer, Ben, and you know, and you need to know that. And I'm I'm sure people tell you that, but you need to be hugged every once in a while for what you're doing, and it's often not easy. You often
No,
don't.
I don't care for plaudits of the crowd. I do what I do partly because it's trauma, what I've seen. It's intolerable to me. Partly because I'm me. I can't answer anything else. That's it. Your light is flashing. I think that's saying you've had enough.
Well, this has been terrific. Thank you, Ben Ferencz.
Okay, you're very welcome.